Southwest Topeka has a good neighbor. State Farm agent Jim Garrison, now at 29th and Urish. If your current insurance situation has you going around in circles, get off the roundabout and stop in and meet Jim and his wonderfully efficient staff. Let Jim Garrison give you a quote and make the Garrison comparison. He's confident that with State Farm's competitive rates, the right coverage, and his unmatched service, you'll want to make him your new insurance agent. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, and Jim Garrison is there for you, northeast of the roundabout at 29th and Urish.
When someone has a passion for what they do, it comes through in the product they provide their customers. Just ask LaRocco's Pizza's new owner, Jason Johnson, about their crust. They make it every day and let it rise for a minimum of 24 hours before they use it for their pizza. And his staff doesn't want to do anything they won't be the best at, and you can taste it in their pizza. LaRocco's Pizza, just a half block north of the I-470 and Gage Boulevard exit. Come taste the difference.
It's time for Real Estate 101 with the Carrie Brown team from Preferred Advisors.
Good Saturday morning to you. This is Carrie Brown, Associate Broker with eXp Realty and the Preferred Advisors team, and you're listening to Real Estate 101. Today, or this month, my co-host will be Scott Sexton from the Law Office of Scott Sexton. Good morning, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. So, obviously, I've had you on the show before, but it's probably been close to a year by now, I would think.
Coming up, yeah.
So, if you would, tell people who you are and what you do exactly.
Okay, well, once again, my name is Scott Sexton. I'm a private attorney. I've been operating my own private practice now since 2009. Before that, I had graduated from Washburn School of Law here in Topeka, and I worked briefly for the state of Kansas and a firm here in town. And then in 2009, I started my own practice, focused primarily in the area of estate planning and long-term care planning, more specifically, where the objective of my practice is primarily around planning for the high cost of long-term care for families. And so it involves any number of topics that can come up and are specific to situations where a senior is looking at long-term care for themselves or a spouse or another family member and wanting to make sure that they can live as comfortably and with as much peace of mind as possible. It's a growing field of law, unfortunately, because there is such a volume of different topics that this type of planning involves, and unfortunately, there really isn't a good start-to-finish class that you can take online or a book that you can read that will give you all the answers to all the questions that an individual has. And in my experience, this area of the law really boils down to a question of peace of mind, and what can a person do so that they don't have to worry about how they're going to be paying for next month's rent or for their high cost of facility care for their spouse. It's a problem that I expect to only explode in the coming years as more and more baby boomers are looking at care options for themselves and for their loved ones. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of folks tend to take the path of least resistance, which involves burying their head in the sand and hoping that things are going to work out, and that's probably about the worst thing that a person can do. And so my practice really involves doing what I can to get the word out that there are options that people can take. The younger and healthier you are, when you start making these types of choices and plans and do this type of planning, the better the options are for you in the long run. And so it's an area of the law that not a whole lot of people focus on, but I have found is quite rewarding and exciting, and it's something that I like to spend a lot of time thinking and strategizing about so that we can resolve some pretty tricky issues for folks.
Which is actually how I met you. You had reached out, needed some help with a particular client, and so, I knew that there obviously needed to be more education on this just because I've seen it in real estate, but I didn't know how much more until we started working together on different clients. and I was sending you clients that I knew that needed your help. So with that being said, obviously you're not giving specific legal advice to anyone in particular, but let's just take a scenario and say mom and dad are going to have to move to a long-term health care facility, and the house has become an issue, or the home has become an issue. What could have been done earlier to prevent that from happening?
Well, not to sound too much like a canned speech, the first thing I always encourage everyone to do, or that I secretly wish that everyone would have done before they even came to meet with me, is I'm always advocating that people have comprehensive powers of attorney in place whenever possible. And of course, everyone has their own unique families with their own unique situations. In some families, there are a number of people who would be good fits for a power of attorney. There are other families where there's no one in particular that we can trust to serve in that role. But time and time again, the biggest barrier that I run into, or the biggest problem that develops in a case, or that has caused a case to really get into an emergency situation that comes across my desk, is because the family didn't do proper power of attorney planning when they could have. A power of attorney is essentially a form that is designed to allow a person to name an agent, to name a third party to be able to act on their behalf, both while they're healthy, but just not available to act, or if they were to be incapacitated. So, for example, I have a power of attorney in place so that if I need to have a check deposited in my bank account, my wife can take that check and deposit it on my behalf at the bank, even though I'm perfectly healthy. A type of power of attorney that is very common is called a durable power of attorney. And durable means that even if I were incapacitated, my wife would still be able to take steps on my behalf. And so it's extremely important that, at the very least, anyone and everyone 18 years of age or older, I would strongly encourage anyone listening to seek out and make sure that you have at least a basic power of attorney in place. There are statutory forms that any attorney that's licensed in the state of Kansas should be able to pull up and get taken care of for you very simply. With that said, though, I do encourage anyone who may have a very complicated family situation or other interesting legal nuances in their case to talk to an attorney and see whether a basic form would be appropriate for them or whether a more comprehensive power of attorney would be appropriate. As a general rule of thumb, I tell everyone, if you're 65 years of age or older, you really should speak to a professional about having a more comprehensive, durable power of attorney drafted to make sure that your trusted family member or agents in your circle of friends are able to take the appropriate actions in case your health were to deteriorate without warning. All too often, I come into contact with cases where no one has powers of attorney for whatever reason. And if they do have a power of attorney, maybe they have a 20-year-old power of attorney that's basically a version of the statutory form. And unfortunately, while the statutory form is great for folks that are younger and healthier, it doesn't provide the proper authority to do lots of more invasive long-term care or financial planning for an individual. And so if you have the wrong POA in place or a more simplified POA in place, it may not provide your family or your loved ones with the authority to act on your behalf like you want or expect them to. So if you do trust your family and want to give them the ability to do emergency planning for you in the future, the very first thing that anyone, even in this example that you gave me, Carrie, it would be extremely important that they have a good, comprehensive power of attorney. And again, I don't necessarily recommend the statutory form for someone over the age of 65. They really need to have a more in-depth power of attorney if they're comfortable with that. So that's the first thing that I would always recommend that someone have taken a look at. Go ahead.
I've seen in real estate also where people have gone on to like LegalZoom and they thought that all power of attorneys are the same. One in particular, the son he was out of the country and his dad was going to be using the power of attorney to sign documents on the sale of a house for him, and that particular document actually didn't cover the house at all. So it's really important to make sure that you're really clear about what it is you're asking for, so that the attorneys can do the right thing.
And that's an extremely important point. I come across online forms pretty regularly in my practice, and while I'm sure that there are good legal forms online that can be obtained, or you could buy forms from your Office Max or Office Depot or other stores even, I've heard, I do not recommend that folks look into that. There almost always more problems than they're worth in the savings that you get from having spent a little bit less. In addition to that, I would also encourage people, if you're wanting a POA and you're willing to spend the $100 or whatever that the online form is, you can find attorneys to draft good, reliable documents for roughly about the same amount. Plus, you have the added benefit of a trained legal professional that's able to actually advise you and customize that document for your specific situation. The computer isn't providing you with comprehensive legal advice, and their fine print will be the first one that will tell you that. And so, while you can easily Google forms that you can download and buy online, I don't necessarily recommend that someone do that just because you're not getting comprehensive legal advice that is customized to your specific situation, and you may not find out that form doesn't work until it's the least opportune moment. And that's exactly what you illustrated, is family didn't find out that the form wasn't any good until they were actually in the middle of a sale. That's the worst time, because then they have to rush and get all of that taken care of. Worse yet, I've had plenty of situations where mom or dad were in a nursing home, they were incapacitated, and that's when we needed to get the power of attorney out for the first time, come to find out that it's no longer working. Well, mom or dad are no longer healthy enough to be able to get a new quality power of attorney in place, and unfortunately, as a result, they come to me, and I in turn have to refer them to someone to get a guardian or conservatorship set up, which, believe you me, is far more expensive than having a good POA drawn up in the first place. So I cannot strongly emphasize enough that, again, if it's a document that's worth getting, it's worth getting proper legal advice so that you can make sure that the documents are customized and appropriately reflect your long-term needs and concerns. You can't get that type of feedback from a computer program or a form that you download off of the internet, and I always encourage people, you get what you pay for in those types of situations, and you really are gambling that they will play out the way you want them to. Yes.
That particular instance that I talked about took an additional 45 days to close because the son was harder to get to, and had to get back into the country in order to be able to get it notarized. So it was quite the mess, and it was a cash sale, and it could have been done actually in 10 days. So just know that LegalZoom is great for Googling some things, but if you really need help, you really need to talk to an attorney. And there have been times that, you need to make sure that the attorney is very aware of that particular subject, too, to make sure that they're issuing the right one. Because not everybody specializes in the same things.
Well, and that's a fair point, too. The state of Kansas is very sensitive about the word specialized, and really that's true for just about any state when it comes to attorneys. Unless you have an LLM or a special family law degree, an attorney is not allowed to call themselves a specialist or to say they specialize in anything. The best that an attorney can say really is, I focus my practice in this area, or these are the only types of cases that I take. Unfortunately, we're not able, like a doctor can say, oh, I'm an orthopedic specialist, or I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm an estate planner. I do estate planning work. I do long-term care planning. Does that mean I took a special class in law school for that? No, because there really isn't anything like that. But with that said, all I do day in and day out, and all that I've done for almost 20 years now is these exact types of case patterns. And so while I can't say that I specialize, I can tell you, hey, look, I've submitted over 10,000 applications to the VA, so I would like to think that my experience has taught me a little bit more about handling the VA than someone who does personal injury cases, for example, which is not to say that again, most attorneys are general practitioners, and an attorney who is experienced in their practice will be able to look at your case and tell you whether or not they are comfortable or have the sufficient experience to be able to advise you on whatever the topic is. And so do not be afraid to ask your attorney or contacts for that you know of if they are comfortable in the area that you're concerned about. And worst case scenario, they'll say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this area. Let me get you a referral to an attorney that I trust here in town.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor, and we're going to get more into long-term health care and how to make sure that your estate is set up for that.
When someone has a passion for what they do, it comes through in the product they provide their customers. Just ask LaRocco's Pizza's new owner, Jason Johnson, about their crust. They make it every day and let it rise for a minimum of 24 hours before they use it for the pizza. And his staff doesn't want to do anything they won't be the best at, and you can taste it in their pizza. LaRocco's Pizza, just a half block north of the I-470 Engage Boulevard exit. Come taste the difference.
It's the season for brand new mulch, and Brown's Tree Service has got your yard covered. Brown's Tree Service utilizes hardwood mulch that retains more moisture. Not only does mulch make your yard more appealing, it also reduces weeds, improves soil, and creates insulation for plants. Get the right mulch for your job at Brown's Tree Service. They shred it, haul it, and spread it in bulk. Or you can haul it yourself for the personal touch to your property. Call Brown's Tree Service at 785-379-9212 or visit online at brownstreeservice.com.
At SportsMomsUnited.com, we celebrate every athlete and support every sports mom. SportsMomsUnited.com is on a mission to put logic back in youth sports. When you ask young athletes why they play sports, their number one answer is fun. For them, that means being on a team, making new friends, having a good time, all of which are awesome memories. We add to the memories by featuring an athlete of the day and sharing their story. Nominate an athlete today at www.sportsmomsunited.com.
Thanks for joining us again. This is Carrie Brown, Associate Broker with eXp Realty and the Preferred Advisors team. And you're listening to Real Estate 101, and I am back with my co-host for the month, Scott Sexton. So prior to the break, we were talking about power of attorneys and making sure that you're getting the proper one. Now let's talk about long-term health care and what you could be doing right now to set things up so that everything that you've worked for doesn't end up having to be auctioned off to take care of you long term.
This is, again, like I said earlier, it's a tricky area of the law, and no two cases are exactly the same. There's always plenty of nuance. But after the power of attorney, the next best thing that I think a family can do is speak to an estate planner or someone who handles long-term care planning and voice your family's particular concerns and questions. So just to give a random example, husband and wife have been married for a number of years. They're in their early 60s, maybe even better yet, let's say early 70s. They're still living at home, and they maybe have a will and powers of attorney, and that's about it. Up to this point, the family has brought no long-term care insurance, and that's not surprising anymore. I see fewer and fewer families, honestly, that have long-term care insurance to pay for nursing homes or for at-home care, just because, unfortunately, those policies have become almost cost prohibitive for younger baby boomers, and certainly for anyone my age, I can't find anything that's anywhere near affordable enough for me to pay for long-term care insurance-wise. So without those on the table, the next stage of planning that I'm looking at with a family is veterans or VA benefits. If either husband or wife are a veteran of the United States Armed Services and provided wartime era service, regardless of whether they were in Vietnam or in Germany during the 60s and 70s. It doesn't really matter where you were at necessarily in the world, as long as you provided honorable service during a wartime. You may be eligible for different types of VA, essentially a long-term care benefit, to help pay for or offset the high cost of assisted living or higher levels of care. Even in some cases where husband and wife are still living at home and want to continue to live at home, but they maybe have family members who help out from time to time, run errands for them or go to doctor's appointments, things like that. Those families can also qualify for long-term care benefits through the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so that's one underutilized benefit most people don't even realize is out there. That's one program that I like to look at as a possible source of being able to pay for care. Something a lot of families don't realize as well is that Medicaid can serve in the state of Kansas as effectively a long-term care type of insurance. We can utilize certain benefits through Medicaid as a way of being able to afford care. And the importance of Medicaid, especially for younger families, let's say that family in their early 70s, is that Medicaid is designed in many ways to make sure that the healthy spouse is able to live within their means for the rest of their life by taking some of the burden of sick spouses' health off of their shoulders. And an example I like to give is my own grandmother. My grandfather was in nursing care here in Topeka for a number of years before he passed away. His cost of care was extremely prohibitive. And as a result, they burned through much of their life savings. After he passed away, my grandmother lived for the better part of 10, 15 years. And because we didn't utilize different types of programs necessarily, my grandmother did not have necessarily all of the resources available for her to be able to use as she would have liked, I think, for those final years of her life. She could have traveled more. She could have done more personal trips and events that she could have spent money on for herself and gotten a better quality of living for herself for those many years. And so with a family as early as their late 60s, early 70s, my recommendation, something that you kind of want to be floating around the discussions with your family and looking at perhaps for long term, is the careful use of trust planning as a way of being able to protect some of your life savings so that you don't have to worry about, if I get sick, my wife is suddenly going to be impoverished for the next 20, 30 years of her life. That's a big fear I have. Is I just from my own experience, I know what the actuarial tables say. I'm going to get sick before my wife does, and my cost of care is going to be more expensive than hers is, because ultimately, by the time she gets as sick as I will, we'll have already burned through our life savings, and she's going to run out of money in the blink of an eye and ultimately go to Medicaid. And so the question that many families are forced to ask is, well, if we were going to run out of money and go on Medicaid anyway, why did I spend all of my youth saving and just not living frivolously? Why did I sacrifice to live responsibly if it's all going to be burned and used for my long-term care? And so the answer to why we have long-term care insurance programs, why are these a thing? Why do we do this? It's ultimately to reward people and encourage them while they're younger and healthier to live responsibly and to live within their means. And so back to that family in their early 70s, let's say they did a little bit of trust planning. And again, it's important to keep in mind you need to speak to someone who is properly advised in your situation. Don't take what I'm about to say as legal advice specific to your situation. But in the state of Kansas, we can set aside assets as a way of preparing them for certain protection if my wife or I or whoever need to go into a care facility or need to pay for at-home care. Typically, you have to spend through all of your assets, and that can include the sale of real estate or other personal property in order to pay for care until you have spent down to a set limit, and then Medicaid will kick in. If we set aside certain assets in the state of Kansas, and this is extremely important if you want to protect farmland, because that's a very common item I run into a lot, is we have family farms or generational farms where we don't want to have to sell off the family farm because mom or dad got sick, and therefore basically son or granddaughter or whoever is managing the family farm no longer has a farm to farm anymore. By setting aside those assets in a trust, the right kind of trust with the right kind of planning, we can shelter those assets from Medicaid penalties or spend down. So an example for that family in the early 70s is they can set aside their home or farmland or any of their collectibles and much of their investments. They can set those aside in a trust, and effectively they can still be theirs and used for their benefit for the rest of their lives. It's just that after 5 years have gone by, we have to allow for a period of time for the trust to mature and the assets in the trust to mature. After 5 years, the state of Kansas will provide certain protections for those assets without penalties. So you can qualify for those types of Medicaid benefits in a way eventually without having to spend down as much of your money. You can protect more of it in the trust. Now, why are we doing that? And it goes back to some of what I said earlier. There are two really important reasons why you want to preserve, filter much of your assets. Number one is I have yet to meet the client that says I scrimped and saved and sacrificed for all of those years so that I could write more checks to the nursing home. Nobody wants that. I did that so that I could, when I'm older, make sure that I spent it on my grandkids or that I got to go on more trips when I was older. I wanted to be able to use that money for myself. I didn't want to just write a check to a nursing home. That's number one, why we want to do that, is it allows you to protect and utilize those assets more for yourself and your spouse. And then number two, and this is something I don't think most people realize, is when you go on Medicaid, with the Medicaid long-term care insurance benefits here in the state of Kansas, many facilities have what are called semi-private rooms or Medicaid rooms. And this can mean different things at different facilities, but as a general rule of thumb, most of the clients that I have and most of the families that I've worked with are not the biggest of fans of semi-private rooms. It oftentimes means you have a stranger as a roommate. You may have to share a bathroom or showering facilities with that roommate. You may have to share a bathroom or showering facilities with a number of people on your ward. There's less privacy, less quality to the room. And if you gave most individuals a choice between a semi-private room and a nice private room, most people are going to pick the nice private room if between those two options. The nice thing about protecting and preserving some of your life savings for long-term care planning is that when you go on Medicaid, if you have nothing at all, you're pretty much stuck with that semi-private room. You don't have any other options. You get what you can take. But if I was able to protect, let's say, $60,000 that I normally would have to have spent down, and I've got $60,000 in my trust, I can negotiate with my facility to say, hey, I'm going on Medicaid, but I want to be able to stay in my private room. Can I pay you, the facility, or have my family pay you from my trust a little bit extra money in order to keep me in that nice private room? And in some cases, I've been able to negotiate a fee as little as $75 a month for mom or dad to stay in their nice private room. I had a facility in western Kansas within the last 5 or 6 years where we negotiated a situation where we had about $80,000 to $90,000 of sitting in the trust that was set aside for mom, and she went on Medicaid. The facility allowed her to stay in her room for $200 a month, so she stayed in a private room as opposed to being moved into the Medicaid ward. And they paid $200 a month out of her trust. She had over $90,000, and when she passed away 6 years later, she never had to worry about losing her room, and she never had to worry about where the next month's bill was going to be paid for because she was able to live within her means for the rest of her life. And the peace of mind that she and her family all had is at no point, once we were able to put the plan in place, did they have to worry, well, where is next month's bill going to get paid from? What happens when we run out of money? Because we could safely say the moment we got her qualified for Medicaid, mom's never going to run out of money for the rest of her life. We can cross that off the list of worries that she has to worry about for the rest of her life, and we can cross that off the list that the family members have to worry about. Because now her 4 sons don't have to worry about who's going to be stuck with the funeral bill, because we've already got that protected.
As you can see, we have a whole lot to talk about this month. If you are needing Scott's help right now, Scott, how do they get a hold of you?
The best option is to contact my office here in Topeka at 409-5228 and just talk to my assistant, Kelly.
and she's been really great to work with. If you're looking to buy or sell, be sure and give me a call at 785-213-5188. And thank you for listening to Real Estate 101.
Thank you for listening to Real Estate 101 with the Carrie Brown team from Preferred Advisors.